Yeah, you're welcome along to the polling station. We were told yesterday that we've 3 days to save the planet. You may or may not have seen that in your papers or online today because, as Neil Channing and I agreed before we came on the show, nobody cares. We are here with Neil Channing, as I mentioned, William Kedjanyi, Paul Krishnamurty, and myself, Johnny Ward. And I am just back from France, William Kedjanyi, where there wasn't much chat about the upcoming presidential election, except on our polling station WhatsApp group, because the odds have only shortened. Macron is out to 1-10, and Marine Le Pen is into 5-1. And somehow I was actually told in the midst of the whole thing to have a few quid on Mélenchon at 66s by a fella at home. So what's been happening?
Marine Le Pen has been closing in the poll lead on Emmanuel Macron. Now, this did happen a bit in 2017, but not to this extent. And we are seeing polls now of a runoff hypothetically, which have Le Pen within the margin of error of Macron. Latest from Harris Interactive yesterday gave Macron 51.5%. That's a loss of 2.5 on the previous polling position, and Le Pen was at 48.5. That's a gain of 2.5. Doesn't take a lot of polling knowledge to know that we are now in what, if you trust the poll and take it literally, is a competitive race. On paper, that is a competitive race which can be swung one way or the other. So Le Pen also is closing in on the first round numbers as well. And she looks, I would have said, pretty certain to make it through to the runoff. Nobody, apart from Mélenchon, is really within hailing distance. And I think looks as if he's got too much ground to make up. So round two of Le Pen versus Macron, and Le Pen is doing better in the polls this time round, it appears.
Cost of living crisis, or the fact that Macron seems to somehow be weak on Russia now, or what's happening?
Cost of living crisis would definitely be my main reason. Broadly speaking, I think Macron has mostly had the benefits of all of his diplomatic actions. Of course, it doesn't help that he's speaking with somebody in Putin who we've already said is very unhinged, and at some point, the nature of Putin and the fact that he is clearly just on grievance calls with him has taken a bit of the limelight off it. But the cost of living crisis really, I think, has demanded a bit of a refocusing. And whilst he's sort of on the foreign front, it has opened a bit of a gap. And I think Le Pen, as well as others, have taken full advantage of that.
Welcome back, Paul.
Hi, Johnny. How are you doing?
What did you want to say last week, and what do you want to say this week that you didn't say last week? We've had 2 weeks of the Ukraine since as well, and we've obviously had the UN's report on the climate, and we have had that little bit of movement. We will get to British politics as well, but what's been going on with you?
Well, I mean, regarding Ukraine, it just gets grimmer and grimmer. And to be honest with you, my optimism has somewhat waned a bit, not least in light of what's happening in France. Because I think, whilst it was very encouraging to see the initial public outrage and the warm words of politicians towards Ukraine, nothing's really happening, is it? Right? Nothing's being done to stop it. I mean, an international investigation into war crime doesn't mean anything because you're not going to bring this guy to trial. Regarding France, again, that would really suggest, because it's completely open that Marine Le Pen is funded by Russia and Eric Zemmour, right? And their money is all over French politics, has been for a long time. That would suggest that people don't care. They're quite happy with fascism. And from thinking Macron was a certainty, I think like everyone else did a month ago, I think this is very, very competitive now. Even if the lead is 6% and not 3%, that's half of where it was a month ago, a third of what it was sometimes 2 years ago. So she's making headway. She's hoovering up other people's votes. I mean, if you combine Le Pen and Zemmour, you're into a third of the vote. There are other right-wing candidates. And as we now see, the big difference with 2017 is that 40%, maybe even half of the far left vote goes to Le Pen in the second round. So I find it very plausible that she wins, because once we have the first round, I think Macron will win the first round, probably not by that much, 3 or 4%. in that second round, it becomes a binary choice. What you're going to have is you're going to have the far left and the far right, the horseshoe, uniting with their anti-centrist, anti-establishment, look how corrupt Macron is narrative, despite the fact that they're all corrupt themselves. And I think, recent history says it works, that it cuts through. Social media populism works.
Could that actually happen, Niamh, where you get far left candidates voting to keep Macron out in the runoff?
Well, obviously, I tend to think a lot of that's a load of old nonsense. But what I do think is quite interesting is a lot of extreme centrists seem to be saying that the Mélenchon people owe their votes to Macron. They have to vote Macron to stop Le Pen, and they have to vote tactically, and they're being told what to do with their vote. There's a good way that the centrists can stop Le Pen if they want to. They could lend their votes in the first round to Mélenchon, and we could see a runoff between Mélenchon and Macron, and they could keep Le Pen out of the last two if enough people tactically voted in the first round for Mélenchon. But they won't do that. I think what's happening is as we become closer to election time, people who started off by thinking, well, I like Pécresse, or I like Zemmour, or I like the Greens, or I like the traditional socialist candidate, and now starting to think, okay, well, my person can't win. So the squeeze doesn't become a squeeze until you get close to the election time. People, 2 weeks out, people can cling to the dream that their person's going to jump from 5 or 10% up to 18 or 20%. But the dream, when you've polled 10%, 20 consecutive polls, you have to realize that if you're an extreme right winger and you're with Zemmour, he's not going to win. So he's not going to get in the last two. So people jump off of him and they jump onto Le Pen. And there are more votes to be squeezed from the far right than there are from the centre or the left. Mélenchon can only get votes. He can only squeeze people who are currently voting for the two Trotskyists, or the 2% of people that are voting for the old Socialist Party, or possibly from some of the Green people. And those people don't even add up to 10% between them. Whereas Le Pen can squeeze votes from the 10% of people in recent polling who say they still like Zemmour, and also the 10% of people who still like Pécresse, although some of her votes will obviously go to Macron. So I just think as you get closer, it's like a kind of 400 meters race, isn't it? Where the stagger unwinds, people start to realise that the voting system means that their person that they'd really like can't win, and they have to choose one of the other people. It's run around. That's for something for the older people. There was a TV program for kids years ago where you had to change your answer by running around. Anyway, there you go. That's killed half the viewers.
Right, but just so we know from the polls, right, for years, not just recent, for years, that a very large number of Mélenchon supporters prefer Le Pen in the second round. That's not like a conspiracy theory.
Well, I think the recent polling showed that something like 36% would abstain in the second round. They're of Mélenchon fans that they don't like Macron, so they're just not going to vote. And I think, I actually think it's quite arrogant to sort of say that it's their duty to come out and help Macron. Macron should have done something during the campaign to appeal to those people, and he hasn't made any effort to do so. And I don't, I think if you're on the left, you get a bit sick of being lectured by people in the centre telling you that you have to do what they want you to do in order to get somebody that doesn't really care about you. I think if you're going to change the system, and you don't really like what you've been served up, and there's plenty of people that Mélenchon, Macron has not been the most popular president in French history. I just think he could have predicted that this was a situation that was going to happen, and he could have made some more appeal to the left, but he hasn't. So on his bed,
we are where we are, right? It's not about duty. Duty's irrelevant. I mean, duty is down to whether you think your duty is. That's fine. It's whether those people who call themselves socialists or progressives want to live in a fascist society, whether they want to retain the rule of law and democracy and human rights. If they don't, well, then they can just abstain and let Le Pen win, because Le Pen's going to get a very large number of votes in their second round.
Well, again,
Right?
I make the exact same. I make the exact same point. If you're thinking that you don't want Le Pen to have a shot of being president, it's very easy for a lot of the Macron supporters to make a conscious decision to lend their vote to Mélenchon, so that the runoff is between Mélenchon and Macron. There's no chance of them doing that.
Okay,
so if you want to point the finger at anyone, maybe point the finger at those people.
Paul.
But if they don't do that, that could indeed happen. They indeed are free to do that. But if on Sunday that doesn't materialise, and the choice is a binary choice between Macron and Le Pen, if you don't, like, the reality is people have to choose whether they want to live in a fascist society or not, whether they want France to come back under the rule of the inheritors of the Vichy regime.
William, is it at all feasible that this could end up being I think he was 20s on at one stage, Macron, and that he actually could get beaten?
It's feasible. I can see it happening. I would still say I don't think it's... I wouldn't be rushing into back Le Pen at 5s. I thought at 8s maybe she might be a sort of hit and hope, or sort of a consolation play if you were desperately unhappy with the thought of her winning. It's worth mentioning that the averages still have Macron, I think it's about 8 or so points clear, albeit that those averages will take polls from all different sorts of polling companies, 8 most reputable, something like that, and they will be over a bit of a longer time scale. I think that the presence of Zemmour has helped Le Pen, just because she has had somebody outflanking her on some of the stuff that's seemed least palatable, and I think it's also allowed her to seem, I hate using this word because it's very loaded, but it's allowed her to seem more moderate, right?
Yeah.
And sort of more acceptable. That said, I think we should remember a large amount of voters are still telling the likes of Ipsos they'd never vote for Le Pen. I think it comes up to just about 50 in the latest surveys taken there. And also I do think it's worth remembering that a lot of this will come to things such as turnout. And whilst it's always a bit more difficult to energize somebody to turn out for an incumbent, I think it's not as if Macron has absolutely no supporters. And coming to this point seems to me as if he's doing okay by French presidential standards in terms of how much of his supporters he managed to keep in terms of approvals going into his re-election bid.
Let's move closer to home then. Boris.
By the way, just quickly on the French, this is just a quick practice for what's going to happen in America in 2.5 years' time. Where the left no doubt get blamed for the fact that a massive turnout came to keep out the far right incumbent president in the last election. The centrists were given control of both houses, largely because a lot of left-wing people made compromises, and then the centrists did absolutely nothing with the political situation they found themselves in. And allow the far right candidate straight back in again, and then the left will get blamed for it. It's just I've seen this movie too many times before. That at some stage these centrist governments have to take responsibility for the fact that people just look at it and say, "This bloke hasn't changed my life in any meaningful way. I don't want to vote for him."
Okay, what do you want Joe Biden to do? What do you want the Democrats to do that they haven't tried to do or aren't doing?
They're just useless. What do you
want specifically? Specifically, what is it that they haven't done? Right? What is it that's made them no different from Trump? Or what are the things that they're trying to do that they aren't trying to do?
Well, then you're telling me that they're trying to get Medicare through. You're telling me that they're trying to get free universal healthcare for all. You're telling me that they're trying to take on climate change full on. You're telling me
they're doing infinitely more on all of those subjects than the right wing will ever do. and they are, as always, hampered by a gerrymandered electoral system that means they don't really have a majority, because you've got Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema.
I understand
holding
that,
Democrat
but
places effectively Republican.
I don't see them making any promise. Like, you think they're not delighted by that? They're massively funded by, you know, the kind of companies, the healthcare companies and you know, fossil fuel companies. They got no interest in doing these things. They're delighted by Joe Manchin hampering them.
They're not in the least delighted, because Joe Biden's got a terrible approval rating because of it. Even if you took the most cynical attitudes about the Democrats, they want to win the midterms, they want to win the presidency. But they're not.
Yeah, well, that's not going to happen. But
they can't,
you know,
they can't, not because they're not trying.
They've done exactly what the Labour Party's done in the UK, and that they've you know, taken the votes of the left for granted, and then they've given them nothing, and they're gonna. It's happening all around the world. And look what's happened to the centre left party in France. You know, they've gone completely. You know, these centrist politicians, they're just a waste of time. It just turns people off politics.
I tend to agree there, and it turns into kind of a battle of stupid populism as well. William, just getting to Britain now, we'll have to move on. And Boris's situation seems kind of more secure than it has been. I see the Greens launched its local elections campaign today, focusing on energy prices, which is quite interesting considering the news of yesterday. But William, you have a bit of an updated, few updates in the markets for us, where things have improved for Boris, it has to be said.
Yeah, his position looking much more stable now. You can get 5 to 6 each of two. He'll be the Tory leader at the next election. Also 5 to 6 he makes it to 2024 or later. I think there has been some movement on the exchange, which I'm sure they'll tell us about in a moment. But he's solidifying. We've had a drift on Rishi Sunak, who's struggling with the images, all the image issues that, to be fair, I think we'd all called at some point on this podcast. He's now 100 to 30 to be the next Prime Minister. Keir Starmer next in at 4 to 1, which indicates that the market's suggesting that Johnson will make it. There'll be an election and Starmer will be hypothetically favoured. Just on the polls for said election, because of course, you know, we're a long way away from another general election. But at the moment, we've seen some Labour leads just extend a little bit, with getting back in the region of sort of 5-7 point leads. Things had narrowed a bit. They'd narrowed, it was more 5 or downwards. But recently, I think we've seen Savanta Comres give Labour a 7-point lead, which is pleasing plenty of Starmer acolytes and people at Southside. Although that said, lots of ground to be covered, lots of issues, I think, for both parties. Also really interesting, a shout out to a piece that Paul War wrote for the Eye on 2 years of Labour under Starmer. Now, I'm not necessarily endorsing any particular part of the party's faction, but I just thought that was an interesting look into what they think they've achieved and what their aims are.
Just on the climate change thing, Paul, I actually kind of half believe Boris when he talks about climate change. I think he does kind of care about that, even though I don't really believe him on anything. Is that something that maybe the Conservatives can become strong on between now and the next election? And he's spoken a lot about offshore wind energy, about nuclear, stuff like that. I don't necessarily see the Labour lead as particularly set in stone either, in terms of Keir Starmer just hasn't really done anything.
No, I don't think it's so similar at all. For a start, I think if you wanted to, whether you think it's enough or not, I doubt any of us will. I think at the next election, I would be almost certain that Labour's offer on the environment will be a lot more substantial than the Tory offer on the environment. And I don't believe, you know, there's a large number of people who still think it's all a hoax, right? Who watch KGB news and watch that rubbish and repeat it. And they're on the right wing. They're part of the Tories' 42% that they need to get. And, you know, you only have to live around the city and hear Tory voters whinging about clean air zones to know that it's just not part of their makeup. I think when you say Boris Johnson cares about it, I think his wife does. I think that's one of the main things about her. There's plenty of anti-net zero politicians in the Tory party. And of course, to get back to my bugbear, right, of course, who's funding all this anti-climate change stuff? We know it is petro-states, Russia, Saudi Arabia. We know that. We've known that for years. And we know that loads of the people who are pushing the anti-net zero agenda are in their pocket, such as Nigel Farage, the one issue guy who suddenly got his one issue and then said, oh, I've got another one that just happens to chime with Vladimir Putin, right? And I don't think that's going to change. People are locked into their boxes. They don't switch anymore. And I don't think people trust any government to get anything done on this. I think people are very cynical about what politicians can achieve, and they don't trust what they say. And so we just head towards Armageddon without doing anything, just carrying on as if nothing's happening.
It is remarkable, because in all of the places I've been and all of the things I've listened to, the polling station is actually the most of anything that is actually in tune with how bad this thing is, Neil. But when does it become something that is the actual overwhelming political issue? When does this happen? Just
depressing, isn't it? I went to 11 different constituencies in the last election and knocked on doors. And I can tell you the number of conversations I got into about climate change and the approach of the Labour Party towards it was one. And generally speaking, it just wasn't a thing that people were bringing up. It wasn't a thing that people asked about, even though, in Labour's 2019 manifesto, they were pretty big on it. The Green New Deal, Rebecca Long-Bailey did a lot of work on it. It was one of their strongest areas, but BBC News never gave them a chance to talk about it. Actually, we're probably going to go on and talk about Channel 4, but Channel 4 News is, a lot of people consider it to be on the left. I don't actually remember seeing Rebecca Long-Bailey on Channel 4 News in the last year. I haven't seen Zara Sultana. I haven't seen Clive Lewis on there. I haven't seen many Socialist Campaign Group MPs on there. Christian Gurumurthy is brother-in-law to Keir Starmer's main speechwriter. Generally, their position of being on the left is very established Labour establishment. They're on the Labour right, basically. So I think they're quite good at speaking about climate, and Labour at the moment have quite good policies on climate. But I don't really see the other news channels giving it such a big emphasis. I always find it odd that the Green Party, because of the first past the post system, unless the Green Party get to kind of 21% in the popular vote, they're not really going to be able to get more than 2 seats. Their target seat is Bristol West for their second seat. Obviously, Brighton Pavilion is a pretty safe seat for Caroline Lucas. And Thangam Debbonair for Labour in that seat is pretty unpopular locally. And Bristol's council has switched quite a lot from Labour to the Greens since the last general election. And lots of Labour supporters in Bristol have been totally turned off by Starmer's leadership and have switched to the Greens. But even then, I can't remember what her majority is off the top of my head, but it's over 25,000. I mean, it's a massive majority to turn over, and that's their main target seat. It kind of amazes me that as we get nearer and nearer to, the world imploding due to climate change, the Green Party never seems to shift much between sort of 4 and 5% in the polls. They had a poll about a year ago where they got to 10%. And I'm just looking now, where are we? They had a 7 in the middle of March, and they had an 8 in the middle of March. But generally, they're sort of 3 to 5. That just seems kind of odd to me. Like even during COP26, they didn't really get up to 10. And I thought there was a stage where they'd kind of killed off the Lib Dems as being the sort of main protest vote, kick the government party for people that didn't want to switch from blue to red. But of course, the Lib Dems coming back has probably been kind of bad for the Greens, really. I found that a bit strange, William, in terms of the European context as well. Like, there hasn't really been a swing towards the Greens in Ireland. I think they're quite weak in terms of their leadership. But there doesn't seem to have been, correct me if I'm wrong here, but there doesn't seem to have been much of a swing towards the Greens when this should be their time, effectively.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, listen, whether you believe that they've actually made progress on it or not is different, but the climate has been something that the Conservatives have at the very least wanted to appear to be seen to take very seriously and debated sort of internally and also externally, and with a lot of public pronouncements on that issue. And it's something that Labour, I think, is sort of tagged along with too, sort of taking the oxygen out of that issue to an extent for the Greens. I also think structurally it's just much harder for a party that isn't Labour or the Tories to do very much in England and Wales. The SNP has its space in Scotland, but they dominate it as well. And I don't think there's that space. I would expect that you should hear more Green voices, although I don't think our media is very good at that, or platforming voices on the whole range of issues. And I think all of that sort of contributes to them not doing as well as you'd expect, given that energy is one of the huge issues of our time, along with others.
But like, Paul, hasn't it come to the situation where I don't know if any of us have kids here. I don't. I'm to the best of my knowledge. So if none of us has kids, right? Is that fair enough to say? Okay. Is it not at a situation where parents should now be advised to really think very hard about having children? Because what can you promise a child that's born in 9 months' time about what world he or she will live in 10 years' time? Not to mind when he or she is an adult or 50 or whatever else, because we've no idea. And like, it's a moral dilemma at this stage. There just seems to be a willful, almost indifference towards it across the globe, where it's like, I'll be grand, it'll be grand. I've other issues.
Well, I don't even think it's just the green issue. That's just one issue. I don't see how. I mean, we live in a country here where for 12 years, education has been starved of money, opportunity has been starved of money. The entrenched divides, economic divides, has got worse. Has it stopped them getting in? No, but I don't think people are thinking of the future. I think that some environmental politics are, like most policy issues, you can probably say it's about all policy issues, are really a conversation for a small engaged minority, maybe 15% of the electorate. And the rest are just really voting on personality or tribe or self-interest or how their mood takes them that day. It's really shallow. And I think that has been one of the big problems of recent years. That's what lies to a large extent behind populism. You know, I used to say 15 years ago, the future, the great divide in the future is between the clued up and the clueless. And the reality is most people aren't interested in politics or public affairs. So they're going to be clueless about it, because they're going to
I don't know how you have to be interested in politics, though, to be afraid of the sea swallowing us whole in about 50 years.
That's right. But ultimately, if your choice is between watching Love Island or the news, or Big Brother or the news, or Coronation Street or whatever, you know, you make that choice that the news is too depressing. A lot of people say, I don't watch the news because it's too depressing. Right? That's a very commonly heard statement.
Watch EastEnders then.
Which is just, you know, it's giving up, right? And I say, particularly on, I would say, the environment issues, it is an incredibly complicated issue to resolve. It's something that most people don't really understand any of the details. I mean, I don't, you know, I have no qualification whatsoever to understand the environment. And then you're saying to people, well, actually, this is political. It matters who you vote for, and that's coming up. That's going to come against the usual wall of they're all the same. It doesn't matter who gets in. They're all corrupt. They're all lying, etc. And so it just turns people off.
On that note, William, you do have an update on the next political editor of the BBC.
Every single episode until
great heart feeding down.
To bring it back. Yes, we have a new favourite. This has been quite a big development, but it turns out that senior bosses at the BBC, being led by Katie Sell and her partner in crime, I've just forgotten his name, Jonathan something. I'm very, very sorry for forgetting his name. Have got to two final candidates, or so we'd thought. Those were Anushka Rastana and Sophie Ridge, but they apparently weren't all too happy with the final two. So what they've done, they've reopened it. and BBC bosses appear to have successfully asked Chris Mason to get involved. As such, he's now being talked about as the favourite by the media in general. This was broken, I believe, by the Times. Rosamund Irwin and Tim Shipman, followed on by everybody else. We made Chris Mason originally 13-2, and he was backed down to 9-4. He's now 15-8. He's our 15-8 favourite at this time of speaking, and he is closely followed by the other two, Anushka Astana 11-4, Sophie Ridge 3-1.
Given that you've decided to make Sophie Ridge and Anushka Astana 11-4, and the other way around 3-1 and 11-4, so effectively roughly even money. Isn't that a bit mad, given that they go onto the shortlist and the person who's going to make the decision said, "Well, I don't like this shortlist. Can you find somebody else?" Does that mean they've got no chance now? Isn't it going to be really weird if they, having said we hate this shortlist, can we have someone else? They then pick one of those two.
I didn't know that.
Job.
You just told, till you just said that, I wasn't aware of that story. But Neil's absolutely right. If they've dumped the shortlist, then it isn't the people on the shortlist, right? And we have got a clue here in that we now know Mars' replacement, and it's Laura Kuenssberg. So clearly, this is going to be unashamedly someone who won't hold the government to account. Therefore, it can't be Sophie Ridge, who does a decent job on a Sunday morning on Sky. Can't really speak about Anushka Astana.
I wouldn't take 10-1 either of those two. Would you, Paul?
Chris Mason, if he's been added to it, you know, Laura's newscast colleague, yeah, definitely. You wouldn't take 10-1 Anushka Astana or 10-1 Sophie Ridge, would you?
Is there value?
Terrible prices, Will. Sort it out, mate.
I'll have a word with the trading team. I was not in charge of putting those prices. I just say. Also, because I'll never live it down, it was Jonathan Munro who was the other boss. But in any case, the rest of the field, just quickly, because the application process was opened briefly to the public, but before I could get my application in, they then closed it, the absolute scoundrels.
That'll be that Putin.
Yeah, it's Putin. Always Putin or Orban, I'm finding. Sam Coates is 5-1, Paul Brand is 11-2, Faisal Islam 8-1, Adam Fleming 9-1.
Can I throw one in? Just as I haven't had a bet in this. I'm not going to have a bet, but I just noticed James Lansdale is 33-1. He was the unsuccessful applicant for doing the job of what's her name, the woman who laughed at the parties and got the sack. He was going to take that job at number 10, and I don't know why he didn't get the job, but he's a true blue Tory. Surely he must have a chance at 33-1.
He's been talked about it an awful lot, but there has just never been any sort of talk or even sort of half confirmation from anybody connected that he has even gone for it or has looked.
Sure, he would be number 10's endorsed candidate.
Number 10, to be fair, would have more than a few happy outcomes, I think, from the general pool people talking about. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there'd be any government pushback on him going, but there's just been never any sign that he's remotely had the appetite for it. And when originally we got the reports, the first few contenders having put applications in, Landale wasn't there. But no, he'd be very big. I mean, I think there is a really big one if he's applied. Nick Watt is never in a million years a 22-1 shot.
Yeah, he's a little bit of a kind of centre right kind of guy on Newsnight, isn't he? I mean, some of these prices, how come Faisal Islam must be 100-1? They're never going to give it to somebody who's critical of Brexit and critical of the government.
The reason the shortness with Islam's price would be a couple of people have backed him. They backed him.
Yeah, they've done their money. Pippa Creer, I mean, she's basically Laura Kuenssberg for Keir Starmer. She's not going to get the job, is she? She's a million.
Is it as partisan as this, William? I mean, I'm from the outside looking in here at what's purportedly, you know, the semi-state TV service, public service broadcasting at its best.
Sorry.
Can I answer that?
Genuinely, I don't know.
Bless you, Johnny. Bless you. That's so sweet.
When I went to journalism school, the BBC was held up on a pedestal. So is it genuinely? I don't know. Is it as bad as you're saying?
Yes,
I'm
yes,
afraid
yes,
so.
yes, yes.
Wow.
It doesn't have
It
the
has been for years.
Wow.
it doesn't have the reputation it used to. In typical BBC style, I'm going to attempt to be reasonably impartial on this. It is less respected and admired / feared. Just swap in whatever synonym you want than it used to. Definitely that is the case in 10 years ago. Definitely, I think it was the case in 20 years ago. The reasons for that would be many and numerous depending upon who you speak to. But are things as partisan as Neil says they are? In some cases, yes. It just depends on sort of who's pulling the strings. But it is widely acknowledged that we have a government which would consider it to be a pretty major screw you if, for example, Lewis Goodall was announced as having had and that stuff does literally feed into markets like this. And you see it anyway with Channel 4, right? We do have a government which goes, do X or else, or do X and we'll kick fuss up about it. And there's no doubt that the BBC is looking for some sort of relations reset with the government. There's absolutely no doubt. And is that factoring into it? I think so.
We've got to end on Channel 4 then, William.
I will let Paul. Paul is itching for this. So I'll let.
Right, Johnny, you mentioned go to journalism school, right? I did my thesis was on propaganda. It might shock you to learn.
Ah, I love it. How long ago was that?
Yeah. How long ago? 20 years ago.
I absolutely love a bit of propaganda. I love propaganda. I want to read the thesis.
Right. But it was about Northern Ireland, funnily enough.
Wow.
Yeah,
Which is going to the polls in May.
It was about 2001, roughly. It was the analysis of British media coverage, press coverage of the peace process.
Right.
And it was ridiculous part then, and astonishingly detached from facts, as one can imagine, because that is what the British media has always been.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's got a lot. The press, as we know, is famously right wing. Right? We know that, and we know that they have a great influence over the narrative. They get an invite every day onto Sky News or BBC News to preview tomorrow's Sun headlines. But it's got much worse. There's been so many examples in the last 10 years. I mean, Laura Kongsberg is the one. Look, I'm hardly some Corbyn defender, but look at the coverage he got, right? Look at, she literally, in the middle of a general election campaign, tweeted that a Labour activist had attacked Matt Hancock and the police were on their way. Right? And then someone released the footage. No one had attacked Matt Hancock. A handful of protesters had jeered him walking into a hospital. No one had called the police. And here she is, untouched, being promoted to the Mars show.
Wow.
And we've seen so many things. I remember vividly the austerity debate after 2010, when there wasn't a single economist in the world who would go on TV to defend austerity. Yet they pushed it all day, and then they'd invite venture capitalists on to talk about it, who clearly had a stake in it. You had the privatisation of the NHS, where they had a Newsnight had a whole special on it, where they had a huge panel of experts, all of whom had a stake in the new Health and Social Care Bill. And Andy Burnham, who was the Health Secretary, was not allowed to converse with them.
Well, think about since Brillo has went to GB News and then didn't last very long. Andrew Neil. How many of these Spectator columnists do you see on the BBC News programme since he's gone? I haven't seen Toby Young on the BBC for over a year now. He used to be on 4 times a week when Andrew Neil was in charge of everything. Toby Young he was famously called an expert waiting for a subject. He's basically, the idiot's idiot. And he just doesn't appear on TV anymore. But his career was totally propped up by Andrew Neil because he was deputy editor of The Spectator. As soon as Andrew Neil went off the BBC, Toby Young's invitations dried up. We used to have to watch 3 people from The Spectator debating things like 3 times a week on the BBC. It was ridiculous.
Kate Andrews has got a season ticket, hasn't she? She's just there every day. Right?
Well, Kate Andrews is now, she's now with The Spectator and she's back on the BBC quite a lot. But a lot of the other Spectator people, Forsyth, he used to be on a lot. He's not on very much anymore. Hardly ever see him.
We are going to have to. We're kind of disintegrating into 4 lads.
Just quickly on Channel 4.
Channel 4.
Because people are saying, it might sell for $1 billion. Now, I don't know whether anyone can remember, but we talked about a year ago, probably a year ago, the election for the Unite the Union General Secretary. And there was a character in that election called Howard Beckett, who didn't do very well, but he made the suggestion that Unite the Union should set up its own media company because the media in this country is too far to the right. Unite the Union has about 270 million in the bank. Some of the other unions of Unison have got a lot of money. They've talked about getting involved in media in the past. If a bunch of trade unions suddenly came up with the money and said, well, let's have a left-wing channel.
Radical thought.
That would be brilliant. But I don't think
a radical thought. Heartwarming thought to end the podcast, Paul.
Sorry. Just on the Channel 4 thing, we need a betting market on this. Who buys Channel 4? Right? Medvedev's got to be a runner. I read stories of John Malone, the Discovery owner, being favourite. If the unions wanted to do that, of course, even if they bid twice as much as the rest of them, they would be blocked. They would be blocked for being political because, Russia aren't political, Medvedev isn't political, John Malone isn't political.
Murdoch.
Murdoch's completely neutral.
Koch brothers, not political.
Yeah.
Well, the Koch brother.
Yeah.
We will have to finish up. William, it is mad though. I'm putting up a message on Instagram last night linking to the UN climate crisis thing while it's about to get on a plane saying, when are we going to take this seriously? And then before Cheltenham, I'm divorced from the Russian issue. I'm asked to do a bit of work for the Evening Standard. Little do I know who actually runs the Evening Standard. So I'm as much of a see you next Tuesday as everyone else will.
Oh, Johnny, don't put yourself down like that. Don't. You bring some attention at least to the issue.
Last word to you.
At least you got a few rubles in the bank for it.
I haven't been paid yet. Last word to you, William.
What's your accounts with those sanctions? I wonder if that's the one. Last word to me. Well, it is National Week actually. So what we should probably do before we spin off is, shall we all go for a sort of treble or something of like National Masters, something political for the end of this year? Maybe something like that. I'm
going to set up.
Actually, Paul have done his master's research by now, won't he?
I have. I like Corey Connors each way. He would be my headline tip for the Masters. Look, I don't know anything about the National yet. I'll have a look at the weekend. But for a laugh, we'll put 50 to 1 freewheeling Dylan in because I like the name. And the two politics bets, it was going to be I was going to put up a treble with Macron, but it's too dodgy now. Labour are winning Australia next month, about 1.44, cracking bet. And then, as we've discussed before, Lula da Silva in Brazil.
Love it. I presume it's me.
Yeah, it is, William.
Okie doke. Masters, I will go for Justin Thomas for the Masters. Of the favourite, I'm beginning to come around to the. I think he's got the best chance. I'm going to be really muggy and have this as an each way sort of combo bet. Him any second now, namely because I think he's probably been reasonably well treated by the handicapper and ran really well. And do you know what? Actually, I will go for the favourites each way combo with sort of treble, I should say, with Chris Mason. So 15 to 8, around 8 to 1, and I think 12s or 14s, which is not too bad if they all come in. So it should give us something to cheer for, at least over the weekend.
You're going to have to wait a while for mine, but I haven't a clue about the Masters, so I'll go with Rory McIlroy. Longhouse boat in the National, and Starmer to be the next Prime Minister at fours. Over to you, Neil.
Oh God, this was going to be my day off and do all my work on the Masters tomorrow and start thinking about the horses on Thursday. I did have a quick look at the Masters yesterday, and funnily enough, the first person that stood out to me that I thought, well, he's definitely going to be in my list was Corey Connors. Get in there. I think it's impossible for me to not bet DJ. They had 23 millimeters of rain there yesterday, or today they're having 23 millimeters of rain. And I think it'll help the really long guys. DJ did not play well there last year. He was coming in much worse form, but I think it's definitely going to help those longer hitters. I honestly, I haven't looked at the national at all or really thought about it yet. I'm going to have to do some work on it. I couldn't tell you, honestly. Sorry. I didn't know we were going to do this bit.
Well, that's very honest of you. I think that was a very entertaining polling station. I hope you enjoyed it, and we shall be back next week. Talk to you then.